Morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day. One of my favorite verses, always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. I like these words from Peter. Peter, the man who tended to blurt things out when he walked the roads of Palestine with Jesus, with not so much gentleness and reverence. Peter, the man who was totally not ready to make a defense when challenged by a woman to say if he even knew Jesus the night before his death. Peter, the man who ran away in fear that night, not in hope. But this epistle, this letter, is written to us from the post-resurrection Peter, filled now with the Spirit and filled with the knowledge that God has conquered death and hate, and filled with years of experience of talking to people about that and knowing how it tends to go better when you do it gently and reverently. I've loved these words that remind me that my faith should be a source of hope for me in a world where sometimes it's easier to despair. Supernatural hope that bubbles up and over within me so much that people who meet me ask, why in heaven's name is she so hopeful? I love that these words remind me that evangelism, that scary concept, and yes, this is going to turn into a sermon about evangelism. Evangelism is something I should always be ready to do, and that evangelism is a defense of hope, which is much more attractive to me than the idea of trying to convince a skeptic. And I love that Peter says that our sharing of faith should be done in a gentle way, with reverence both to God and to the person we're speaking with. And I'll just let that sit there as we consider how much of the tele-evangelism and other evangelism of our faith is done these days. So let's think a little more about these ideas. First, Peter assumes that our faith will produce an unusual, unnatural hope in us that passes the understanding of people who we encounter. Does your faith in God, if you have faith in God this morning, does it lead you to a hope that is based not on your circumstances or what you're going through, but rather in the presence of God with you? As a Christian, when you speak, do you tend to express more hope or more despair? I'm not sure that the people in my life will describe me as unusually or overly hopeful. I tend to err on the slightly melancholic side, and I confess to you that my hope on any given day is more based on what's going on that day and my estimation of how it will turn out. My hope varies based on my circumstances so often. But Peter says, seems to indicate that if God is in our lives, we live with hope, exuding hope, even in the most difficult of times. Easy, right? Of course it's difficult. And I might say it's impossible for us to achieve this state on our own, but Jesus in the gospel gives us a clue as to how this unnatural hope is going to take up residence in you and me. Jesus says, I will go to the Father and send you another, the Spirit of truth, to abide in your hearts, a spirit the world cannot see or receive. Jesus promises that this Spirit of God will come to us and abide, take up home in your heart. And truth, this is a spirit of truth, and the biblical word for truth means an uncovering of what is real. So this Spirit comes to our hearts and uncovers the reality, the previously hidden hope and unseen presence of God in us. If God is with us and we start to get that in our lives, then actually we can hope in the face of despair. The Spirit uncovers the reality that God is with us, not far away, as the world presumes. So if you, like I and many of us, are struggling to live with a resilient hope, call out this morning for the Spirit of God. Jesus describes the Spirit as a parent coming to an orphaned child. All the child does is cry out, and she comes. The child doesn't have to persuade the parent. The child doesn't have to behave well first. The child doesn't have to understand the theology of what's going on. The bond of love is what propels parent and child to connect. So on this Mother's Day, know that the love and attention and the Spirit of God is as available to you as a good mother to their child. One of the reasons I love working in the jail so much is I'm consistently and constantly faced with individuals who, despite being in probably the worst circumstances of their lives, express and live in hope. It's humbling to me, and it's a continual incentive to continue to learn from these individuals and ask God for that same hope that's based entirely on the presence of God's Spirit and not the circumstances of our lives. Today we have available the booklets that the men wrote in our last St. Mark's writing group. And I want to quote from one of these poems that a man wrote to an incarcerated friend in one of our groups. He says, and I quote, "I want you to reach your hopes and your dreams. I hope that there are no drugs in between. For us to go back to drugs would be insane. Nothing but broken dreams, total darkness, broken glass, broken hearts. What matters most is that we're here for each other, will help out others, which makes us hope dealers." Hope dealers. He's come from a life dealing drugs and despair to a community in recovery dealing hope. Can St. Mark's, can we be hope dealers in our communities? These words from the men incarcerated in Elmwood are a gift to this church and a challenge. And I'd love every person in this room to walk out of these doors and think of themselves as hustling hope dealers in the world. Walking the streets, just looking for opportunities to deal hope. This is very much what Peter is suggesting evangelism actually is. Sharing our faith in God is providing an account of why we dare to keep hoping in the face of evidence and conditions that tell us despair is logical. That's a very attractive trait. I grew up in Scotland, and I remember our Episcopal church that I grew up in organized some door-to-door evangelism. I was a teenager, and they asked me to help. And I guess in the days before social media, you had to go and knock on people's doors to reach them. And I remember knocking with dread, as time after time people would be annoyed and come to the door, and we'd have to explain why we were interrupting their Sunday afternoon football watching. And furthermore, persuade them that they were sinners, which is not popular when you've just been interrupted watching the game. And then without God, they were destined to go to hell, which is bordering on insulting, and that we happen to have the secret to how they could avoid all of that. Let's just say my memories are more full of cringing than conversions. I actually don't know if any of us came out closer to God because of those encounters. But Peter says sharing our faith or evangelizing is not persuading people they need to change or do or not do a certain thing. Evangelism is giving an account of why we are so full of hope. And that has a very, very different feel. In addition, Peter says, always be ready to do this. Are we ready? I'm not sure how many people in your life ask you in a given day, why are you so full of hope? But I do believe that, one, if we ask the God who loves us to fill us with the spirit of hope and truth, and then two, put ourselves in situations where we connect with people who are desperate for hope, those opportunities will happen more and more. Just this week in jail, I've been asked, how can God be real if these things keep happening in my life? And do you really, chaplain, believe in all the miracles in the Bible? And three, give me a reason to keep trying. I'm not going to tell you exactly how I answered all of those, but what I will say is if you feel a need in your life for opportunities to be ready to share the hope that is in you, I really recommend coming to jail. The same opportunities, though, will come up wherever you connect with people who are struggling, whether it's in outreach ministry or at home or at work or with children or young people in your life or your friends. If you're full of the spirit of hope and you connect with people who are struggling for hope, the opportunities will start to come up. So an idea, if you're bored this afternoon or you find yourself sitting with a friend, try verbalizing out loud in words your answer to some of these questions. What would you say if someone asked you, why do you keep hoping? Or how is God real in the face of this particular tragedy? Or why do you believe in God anyway? What would you actually say? Are you ready? Then finally, Peter tells us how we share our faith is important too. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it, with gentleness and reverence. I'm guessing if we were to play a word association and I gave the word evangelism to you, you would not come up with the words gentle and reverent. Which is tragic, right? It's ironic to think that the basis of this word evangelism is the Greek evangel, meaning good message. The word angel comes from the same root. This is meant to be a good, an angelic, a positive interaction. One of our principles that we hold in the jail ministry is that in our ministry with anyone, we begin by listening deeply, attentively to the person we're with, because without listening to that story and the hurt and the needs and the situations behind the story, we cannot presume to come with what someone needs or know what they want, especially someone in a vulnerable, struggling situation. If we don't listen, we tend to rush to assume and to judge. So listening with gentleness and reverence for that person is a witness to the God who listens to all of us with gentleness and reverence. And as we listen, trust begins to build. In the jail, trust in me as a chaplain. Trust in Christians in general, that maybe they're not all out just to tell me how bad I am. The building of trust in the church, that maybe it's a place that can welcome me and listen to me. And ultimately, of course, as we represent God, trust in God, that God is good, that God listens. If there's someone in your life who's struggling and you do not know what to do for them or say to them, don't. Don't do anything. Don't say anything. Just sit down gently and with reverence ask, do you want to tell me a little bit about what's going on? And then wait. Trust grows, and as trust in a relationship grows, opportunities to offer the reasons for hope will arise. Your words of reassurance and hope and how God has worked in your life. And when hope starts to grow, transformation happens. Not overnight, but more like a seed that grows in the earth slowly into a plant that bears fruit. Listen gently, build trust, share hope, experience transformation. I think Paul, who we read about in Acts, might have listened to Peter's words. As he wandered around the Areopagus, that business and government center in Greece, and listened to the culture of that place before he spoke, listened to their poems, saw how people lived, and shared, instead of a place of judging their pagan and often crazy culture, a place of understanding and listening to the spirituality that was already in that culture. Another of the men in our jail writing group wrote about his struggle to be seen by people in the community, not for the tattoos on his skin and what they represent, but who he is in his heart. He wrote, "What do you see when you look at me? A loving father, a brother, a son, or a wannabe gangster with a gun? I'm an angry man full of hate, or am I starting over with a clean slate? Do I love to fight, or fight to love? What do you see when you look at me? Will you judge me for what I look like and the fact that I'm sitting in jail? Or will you listen to me gently and reverently and actually find out what I'm striving and hoping for? Will we love to fight or fight to love?" Jesus in the gospel makes it clear that the basis, the motivation, the starting and the ending point of all of what we do is love. The love of God, pouring into our hearts and overflowing to other people. So I commission you, my friends of St. Mark's, I urge you on the streets of our communities, in our homes, with our families, in the workplaces we go to, go out and fight to love and deal hope. Amen.